Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always, and we're back today to share our 2024 or NFL 2024 draft wide receiver prospect rankings, or specifically our top five, because we're not going to go through all of them. It is, as many consider a deep class, so it'd be interesting to see. Especially some of these guys, maybe towards the end of our top five, will they go? And honestly, how many wide receivers will go in the first round? I'm be interested to see what Vegas has the line at the when it comes draft time. But it's of course similar with the quarterback rankings. I don't know John's top five. I have an inkling, but I don't know his top five. He doesn't know mine, so it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. As to reiterate, we have not collaborated really at all over this. These are both our own independent thoughts and feelings and rankings, as always. So that will be fun. But it was, I don't know for you, it was really tough to round out this top five. For me, especially, I feel like the number 5 spot was tough because it feels like there's a bit of a big 4, in my opinion. And then 5, like there's still really good receivers. 5, 6, 7, 8. But it was really tough for me, like I mentioned to you yesterday through text. To kind of nail down a number 5. But what were your thoughts about the process in general, about this class as a whole?
Wide receiver, it's one of those positions that every year it feels like we're getting 5, 6, 7, 8 guys who could go first round. Like how you're talking about, it's tough to pick a 5th guy. That's not because there's a lack of options. It's because there's a lot of options. And that's just kind of how it is. Like, I think that there's a legitimate argument for probably 5, 6, 7 different guys to be in that 5th spot. Because usually in most wide receiver classes, like 3 or 4 that are kind of consensus. You might have them in different orders, but most people kind of generally their top 5. This year, it's pretty similar. There's about 3 or 4 guys that are pretty consensus. But then after that, there's a lot of really great options. And so, it's one of those positions that is interesting because it has the similarity of where, like, every year I feel like there's a lot of great running backs that come out in the draft, but at the same time in the NFL, it's so highly coveted, and that's why, like, the wide receiver, it's become one of the highest paid positions in the league. So, and we're seeing wide receivers get taken earlier and earlier in the draft every single year. So, this is a really good class, and I don't know, I'm really excited for it. I feel like a lot of great teams that are needing a receiver are very excited for this class because they could be getting their wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and honestly, too, like, there's going to be guys like we saw last year, where in previous years, where that aren't taken in the first round, that, hey, they got to the right spot, right situation in the NFL. It all clicked. Like we saw Puka Nacua last year, obviously. No one had him. Obviously, as a first round guy, was taken in the 5th round there. So just to go back to our rankings last year, I know we had a similar top 3. You had Quentin Johnson at 1, and I had him at 3. He's one of those still TBD, to be determined. I know it wasn't the prettiest rookie season, but obviously he wasn't drafted to be the guy right away. Who knew that Mike Williams would get hurt, and then they'd have that offense would just have a whole litany of issues. That team really. So I don't really put that on him. And then if I remember correctly, I think did you have Zay at? I had Zay as my 1. I remember you have Zay at 2. Okay, yeah. So we both were high on Zay. I think we especially saw that as the year got on, that he started to become the guy for Odell, for Lamar Jackson. That's kind of the reason why we're seeing they like Odell go, because obviously Zay Flowers is kind of the guy for them. Jordan Addison, a guy who I don't think I had my top 5. I know many consensus did. He obviously had a really good middle of the year, especially with Justin Jefferson out. And obviously, no Kirk Cousins hurts, but he showed some promise. And a bunch of other guys, like obviously Rashee Rice had a huge role for the Chiefs.
Then also, I want to add this in because this could happen to some of the guys in this year's class. You get like a Jackson Smith and Jigba situation where it's like it's a really tough room, and you don't really know if he's going to have the opportunity to shine yet, which ironically actually happened to not only him but also Zach Charbonnet, who they took as well, which is so. Yeah, it's just one of those things too with wide receiver where like sometimes certain guys go to specific situations where It's a little bit of a log jam. They need to wait for it to kind of free up. We've seen that in the past with other receivers. And then you get other guys, who just pop off like Puka Nacua year one.
Yeah, and even I want to shout Tank Dell. He's really started getting going as the season went on. Unfortunately, got hurt, so we'll see.
Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed. I mean, there was a lot of
Jaden Reed
guys.
had some moments, and Michael Wilson too. Like he was a guy that popped up. So, and who knows? Maybe we'll see more from last year's class. Sometimes it takes a year or two for them. But anyway, let's dive into this year's class specifically. So for this one, do you want to do the same thing as last time? Start at 5 and just do snake kind of.
Sure.
And go down. All right. So I'll go first this time because I feel like, once again, usually I make you go first. Okay. I know last time I went first.
I was going to say, I made you go first last time, so I can if you want. But
No. I feel like, if I'm not a record keeper, but I feel like, I have some, my tab to pay off in terms of going first. Anyway, so for my number 5 receiver in the 2024 NFL draft class is going to be Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. For me, he was just one of the more well-rounded guys. He can come in and play in the slot. That's probably where he's going to mainly be, being kind of one of the smaller, twitchier guys. But still, 6 foot, 186. That's still pretty good size. I think he can still win a bit on the outside as well. Got good speed, got really good short to intermediate. He may not be a great deep threat just because of his size, but he can still scare people with his speed. I feel like, and we saw it a couple times at Georgia, and granted, not the best quarterback situation the past couple of years for them. So, still a little more meat on the bone. So he's not as freaky as some of the other guys at the top 4, and that's not really his fault. But still, I think for me, there weren't a lot of like glaring holes in this game. Obviously, there's some things that, hey, you wish he was, like I said, a bit more athletic. But hey, he is what it is. But nonetheless, a little more technically sound guys, and it was really tough. But I had him at 5 just because I feel like, especially floor wise, his floor is pretty high, and he can have success in a lot of different offenses, as opposed to some guys, like we mentioned, where kind of have to go to the right situation a little bit too, draft-wise as well. But, so Ladd McConkey out of Georgia for me is my number 5 wide receiver. So who do you have as your number 5 wide receiver for the draft class, John?
I actually have Ladd McConkey's former teammate, who did end up transferring over to the University of Texas, Adonai Mitchell at number 5 for me. I agree with you. I think that the 5th spot was really tough. McConkey, he was one that I was considering. I spoiler alert, I don't have him in my top 5, but he was one I was heavily considering, as was like Troy Franklin from Oregon, another guy I wanted to shout out. The thing that I just kind of came back to on Adonai Mitchell is I feel like he has the potential to end up being a number 1 on the outside, and I think that's kind of where I ended up giving him the edge. At Georgia, he didn't really do a whole lot his first 2 seasons. His freshman year, he had like 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. His sophomore season, he only ended up playing 6 games, and so he just wasn't really involved that much. But then he transfers over to Texas, has a good year, 800 yards, 11 touchdowns. And the touchdowns was a really big one because he was a huge red zone threat for them. His size combined with his fluidity, I thought was really impressive. Hold on, let me look up his 40 time because I'm pretty sure he had a really impressive 40 time.
4.34.
Yeah, 4.34, and he's running. He's 6'4", so he's got blazing speed. He's got the height. The one thing, and I think this is fixable, but the one thing that I was a little disappointed about with him, especially considering his frame, is it didn't feel like he really attacked the ball. Think like a Calvin Johnson, right? Like Calvin Johnson, similar, like 6'5", really fast. I would say Calvin had a lot more like weight to him. I don't actually know their weights in comparison, but Adonai Mitchell definitely feels a lot more like thin. But like when you think of Calvin, right, you think of him going up high, pointing the ball over these people, really utilizing that size. I didn't feel like Adonai Mitchell truly did that when he was in college. But like I said, there were some things that maybe I'd kind of give him a pass on, considering the whole Georgia situation and then having to transfer away and go to a whole new system, whole new scheme. And I don't feel like that Texas is really one of those those programs that was like heavily reliant on size specifically. I mean, just historically, a lot of the guys that were coming out of there, the receiver position recently, including his teammate Xavier Worthy, they were just using a lot more speed, a lot more like stuff to kind of get you open. All of a sudden, I'm blanking on their coach's name, former Alabama OC.
Steve Sarkisian.
Sarkisian, yeah. Like, think about Sarkisian's days in Alabama, where he's got Devonta Smith, he's got Jalen Waddle. Like, his kind of schemes don't really rely on these big, sizable receivers. And so part of the thing when it comes to like him not really showing that off in college is also I just don't really think that the scheme they were running called for him to have to do that a lot. So yeah, Adonai Mitchell, he is at number 5 for me. Like I said, it was very tough. Lad McConkey, Troy Franklin. I mean, we could go through a list of other names too that were honorable mentions. I don't know if you want to at the end, but yeah, he's the one who I kind of went back to that I feel like if he can work on a few things and really unlock that potential, I feel like he could be a true wide receiver 1.
Yeah, just before you hit the number 4, I just want to mention like those 3 names: McConkey, Mitchell, and then Troy Frank. Like they're all. That's who I was. Those are the 3 that I was tackling between 4 and number 5. So yeah, I think good shout out there in regards to like that's kind of the conversation. And there's still a bunch of other guys after them where it's like kind of a little bit like, what do you like? Do you like size? Do you like It's a little bit of a preference there too when you start getting down that list. But nonetheless, yeah, you can go ahead and go to number 4.
Oh yeah, I forgot we're doing Snake. Okay, at number 4 for me, this was also tough between 4 and 3, and technically I am ranking one above the other, but to me this feels more like a 3A, 3B. I'm gonna go Brian Thomas from LSU at number 4. Similar to Adonai Mitchell, great 40 time, 6'4" frame. He weighed 205, so he's actually about 10 pounds bigger than Mitchell. But man, he was a deep threat through and through. Like, he demanded safety help and ensuring that like you're having to watch out for this guy because he was a consistent threat to beat press coverage. He was a consistent threat to beat you over the top. It was scary. And I'll talk a little bit later whenever I get to my number 3, who, like I said, is 3A, kind of 3B, of why I specifically ranked that person above Brian Thomas. But yeah, Brian Thomas, I mean, the guy's a stud. I think he's for sure going to go first round. Whatever team gets him, they're getting a wide receiver 1, which is crazy because, that LSU team, we could be seeing Jaden Daniels go in the top 3. We could be seeing him, Malik Neighbors. Like, imagine all 3 of them going first round, like nuts. And to think about LSU's like historical success like that, like, I mean, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Joe Burrow, like the school's been pumping out like passing offense weapons recently. So
like Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts. So yeah, Brian Thomas, he was at number 4 for me. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that just because I don't want to spoil exactly why I ended up ranking the other guy above him. So I'll talk a little bit more about Brian Thomas when I go to my number 3.
Yeah, well, don't worry because I think we have the same 3-4-ish, but obviously different. Yeah. Because my number 4, which I'm assuming is be your number 3, is Rome Odunze. Well, I'm pronouncing that Rome, out of Washington. This guy's, I think, obviously you see his route running technician levels. He's just a technician, is what I'm trying to say. Like, he's one of the, honestly, it's tough, but he's either 1 or 2 in terms of this class, in terms of just pure route running. Like, he is he's going to come in, know of the full route tree. He has good enough size and length to utilize that, and decent enough speed and agility to make those cuts, make guys miss, set guys up. Obviously get open, which is the big thing. One of the reasons he's at 4 for me is just wish he was a hair quicker in general. Like, I think he's good enough. I have him comped to like kind of like a Keenan Allen type kind of guy where, Keenan Allen's always just going to be dicing you up short to intermediate. And then maybe every now and then he's going to set you up for the long ball. And, it's going to matter, his quarterback a little bit there too. But yeah, like not a lot of holes in Rome's game. And I feel like his floor is definitely higher probably than a Brian Thomas, who I'll get to in a second. But I just feel like really he's at 4 of those, like his upside, I just don't feel will be as high. He could easily be. I just have questions if he could, and concerns if he could be a true number 1. But I have no doubt that he can be still a very good number 2, or maybe he can still be a solid number 1 as well. As we saw, like I said, Compton Keenan Allen, he was a very good number 1 for a while for the Chargers. So yeah, it's like even though he had a 4.45 40, which is considered a little slow these days, I feel like even that was a little bit faster than his play speed as well. But nonetheless, he's great agility, great route. Like he's going to be successful and be able to get open then at the next level, and has a good size at 6'3" ish, 210. To still, even when he's covered, you can still kind of throw him open per se as well. So he is my number 4, which is going to lead to my number 3, which I guess we'll get more of this conversation here for both these guys. That's where I put Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. And granted, history showing, if you've been following the podcast, I am a little more of a sucker for the more explosive, athletic guy, which obviously, like you alluded to, that's what Brian Thomas is. He's going to come in, be a deep threat almost immediately. Like a comp would easily be like an AJ Brown type. Obviously, he's not the physical specimen AJ Brown is, and I think obviously weakness to his game may be some of the nuances of route running. Obviously, with some of these speedsters, they rely a little bit more on their pure ability as opposed to sequencing, setting things up, being more precise in their cuts. Because for the most part, throughout their career up to this point, it hasn't mattered. They haven't they've been like, man, I could just fly by that guy, or scare him at least after the first few times, and then I can set up stuff. Obviously, got to work on, like I said, short to intermediate, just footwork, clean some of that stuff up. But I can easily see him doing that. He's a world-class athlete, and nonetheless, regardless, he's going to be a very good intermediate, 10-plus yards down the field, especially if he gets a couple more routes in his route tree, and depending on where he goes, I think he's going to just scare a lot of defenses and secondaries going forward. So, I'm with you, though. It's more of like a 3A, 3B, and this is another one where it's like kind of like, what do you like? Do you like the more athletic guy, or do you like the more technical guy in Rome? And that's why I put Brian ahead of Rome for me. But once again, I'm sure you have similar reasoning as to why, or your own reasoning as to why you put Rome at 3 and Brian at 4, which I'm assuming Rome's 3. I'm not sure. Maybe you'll surprise me.
I'm not going to surprise you. I do have Rome Odunze at number 3. Really great receiver. I agree with the Keenan Allen comparison. I do think he might be a little bit more athletic than Keenan, but I think their games are definitely similar. Honestly, I for him and Thomas, like I said, 3A, 3B for me. I think that the only reason that they kind of quote unquote suffer in this class is that they happen to be in the same class as the guys in the top 2.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like I was even thinking about if you put both these guys in last year's class, I'd maybe take them over almost anybody in that class. And that was a really good one too. So like that's just kind of how talented this year is. But yeah, Rome Odunze, he's great. I really liked the versatility he was able to show. I feel like he's an athletic freak. I think that he can just do a lot in terms of, which, by the way, I just want to add too, this class is like weirdly tall for receivers. Like, I don't know if you noticed that. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. is tall, Odunze is tall, Brian Thomas is tall, Adonai Mitchell is tall, even like Troy Franklin, he's like 6'2", Keon Coleman's like 6'5". Like there's a ton of receivers that have been going in this like first, second, third round kind of areas that are all like very tall. Anyway, back to Rome Odunze. Guy's an athletic freak. Ran a 4.45. He's 6'3". The reason that I ended up putting him over Brian Thomas, and I'm actually a little surprised that so many people are kind of throwing out there that like he doesn't get open. His career contested target rate is significantly lower than like a handful of people in this class. I mean, even some of the top guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. To put this in perspective, because some people, I don't know, I'll just say this. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, like one of the key indicators of how he was not actually going to be good in the NFL was his career contested target rate in college was 37%. 37% of his targets were contested. Now, obviously, some of that could be on the quarterback, right? Because you can't control, like, if you're not open and the quarterback decides to throw it to you anyway. And it could just be like a function of the players around you. Like if nobody's open and your quarterback still decides to throw it. But also some of it is like your ability to get open, right? Because we even see it with a person like Keon Coleman this year. Spoiler, out of like most of the top prospects, his contested target rate is at 30%, which is not that great because he's not that great at creating separation, but also somewhat because he's really good at like doing contested catches. So his quarterback maybe is a little bit more willing to do it. Anyway, point being on Rome Odunze, I don't think that it was his quarterback is, making these bad throws and all this kind of stuff, because Michael Penix was great in college. And so I've kind of removed that. And this is also removing screen passes, just so we're clear. Remove screen passes. This is just throws that are past the line of scrimmage. He had only a 19% career contested target rate, which is better than Adonai Mitchell, Brian Thomas, Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., like all the guys that we're going to be talking about in this top 5. And so I felt like he was creating a good amount of separation. And although he did this past year have a lot of passes that were contested, even compared to almost everybody in the class, he had a higher contested catch rate than a lot of the studs that we're talking about, I think outside of maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. So, yeah, I have Rome Odunze at number 3 over Brian Thomas, just because of those slight differences right there, just to show how small this difference I'm talking about, by the way. Rome Odunze, 19%, Brian Thomas, 21.5%. So it's not like this big gap. I just think that Odunze has a little bit more versatility to where I think I could see him go in the slot or on the outside. I do think he's just ever so slightly better at getting open.
Yeah, I do agree with that, by the way. That's a good point. Like, Odunze, like many elite receivers, you can move him around, especially with how much motion is being used. Like that could be concerning, and depending on the matchup, and especially with his size, that if all goes well, it could be a major chess piece.
Yeah, especially, and the weird part when we're kind of doing these projections too is I'm also just wondering, like, man, like what kind of offense is gonna want someone like him versus someone like Brian Thomas, and could that just show up in the way because let's be real, like obviously if you're like an elite like superstar, you will overcome whatever situation you're put in. But we've seen even like some stud receivers like a DJ Moore just get completely overlooked because like Baker Mayfield is the quarterback or something. So anyway, that's just something that I try to consider for like kind of how I'm projecting them in the NFL. And I feel like Rome Odunze is one of those guys that, I feel like some super creative mind is going to want him because of that versatility. So he is my number 3. And then number 2, this is where things got a little tough for me. And
you're not alone, dude. But go ahead.
I think did I mention this to you like maybe 3 or 4 months ago? I feel like I threw out a comment there like 3 or 4 months ago saying, I wonder if Marvin Harrison Jr. is a little overrated.
I do remember this conversation, and yes.
It wasn't like I was like hard investigating it, but it was just something that at the time I was sitting there thinking like, this guy's getting hyped up probably more than any receiver I think I've ever seen in my lifetime in college football. Like, obviously, and I'm not including like probably my early life with like Larry Fitzgerald and Randy Moss and these kind of guys coming out, because I don't remember exactly when they were in college. Like I wasn't cognizant of what was happening back then. But like I don't remember any wide receiver prospect in recent memory that has been getting as much praise as he has. Do you?
The only one I agree with that. I think the only one that comes close to would be like maybe Jerry Jeudy. But even then, it was not like, hey, lock it in. Then, he's the number 1 receiver. He's going to be taken like at the top 5.
Even then, I felt like that year there was like definitely it was a minority of people. Like the majority said Jerry Jeudy was number 1. Did we have a podcast back then? I don't think we ranked the class that year.
I think that was like the year after I'll go take a look.
Regardless, there was like I felt like there was a clear like trio of like there was the Henry Ruggs people, there was the CeeDee Lamb people, and then there was all the other people that were like on the Jerry Jeudy train. But there was definitely like those 3 kind of groups. So where this year it feels like a vast, overwhelming majority are just like, all right, Marvin Harrison Jr. is number 1. Who's after him? And I say all that to say, I'm putting Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 2 in my wide receiver rankings. I did not expect myself to be doing this because of all the ways that everybody was talking about him. But when I sat down, I watched some of his tape, and I compared to some of the other things that I saw, I just kind of looked at his career. And even like, I think this conversation got spawned from like, I was watching one of his games, and he had a great game. But I don't know, there's just something about him that I was like, he doesn't feel like the next like generational receiver. And I'm not trying to discount his talent because, like I said, I think that he and the guy I'm going to talk about at number 1 are definitely better than anybody that was in last year's class. I'm not saying he's bad by any means, but when I'm thinking of the way that people are talking about Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm expecting you to be Calvin Johnson, like quite frankly. Like that's kind of how I'm expecting it. And I didn't really quite feel that. So Marvin Harrison Jr., really good receiver, 6'4", 205, really good size, really good speed, good strength. I felt like he was smart. I feel like he's got a pretty solid route tree so you can move him around. But at the same time, I don't know if I felt like that X factor, if you will. And then when I start to kind of dive a little deeper into the stats and I start to get into some of these other things, when you're talking about the contested target rate, Marvin Harrison Jr., 27%. That's worse than Neighbors. That's worse than Thomas. That's worse than Adonai Mitchell, Rome Odunze, Troy Franklin, Lad McConkey. Like, not the greatest of contested target rate, which I know that he was very heavily featured inside of his offense. So I'm not trying to deny that, he was definitely getting a lot more work than maybe some of these other guys were. But yeah, I don't know. It just felt like I was expecting, and maybe this is just because, like I said, I was hearing all the crazy hype, but it felt like I was expecting more when I was watching him than I ended up getting. So,
hey,
yeah.
Well, listen, you're not alone. I know my boy Sims.
Well, actually,
Go
real quick before you continue, I just want to throw one final caveat because
Go ahead.
I think all of that sounded really negative. The guy's a stud.
Yeah.
The guy is a stud. Like, I'm not trying to discount him. But he feels more like when we're talking about these like top level elite like receivers, he feels more to me like an AJ Green than a Calvin Johnson. And remember, AJ Green was a stud. Like, that guy was a top 5 receiver for a handful of years in the NFL. He was a true number 1 for his offense. Like, he was fantastic. But Calvin Johnson was a game breaker. Like, that guy could take 3 people on. And like, there's a reason he, prior to Cooper Kupp, had the greatest wide receiver season of all time.
Yeah, and that was with 16 games, not 17.
Yeah. One less game.
But yeah, listen, like, you're not alone. I know Daniel Jeremiah's come out. My boy Chris Sims he had Marvin Harrison at 3 in his rankings. And Daniel Jeremiah came out and said like a lot of NFL teams feel that Harrison is number 2 to another guy, which I'm assuming we're both having number 1. Because I'm gonna spoil that too. I have Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 2 as well. And I'll help you out here. I'll wax a little poetically about more what he can do because I have him like comp to kind of like a Devontae Adams / DeAndre Hopkins, but I think AJ Green's also really good. Where like he's gonna do most of his work, especially in intermediate, and he has great body control, and great hands, and obviously the routes. His father's Marvin Harrison, so not a shock that he's one of the more technically sound guys. Right. And so, all that contested catch is still really good. But I think what you're alluding to, what many are starting to see in this process, and once again, like most years, he is number 1. It's just this year, there's some really good guys, especially the guy that I'm sure we both have ahead of him. But like a little bit of worry about explosiveness, especially like, yes, he'll probably be able to get by most people. Most NFL corners, but still, like maybe some of the elite guys, like he doesn't have like scare you deep speed. It seems like, and also it doesn't help. Didn't run his 40 or whatever, but not that that's mattered at times. And then even like his agility and after the catch, his yak. It feels like there's more to be desired a little bit. Like, yes, he's still really good, but even at the college level, it's like above average, I would say. I wouldn't say, like you were saying, like it's not like elite or game breaking where you see him take a slant and he just outruns like 2 or 3 guys because he's just that explosive or makes a couple guys miss. That's not really his game. But nonetheless, like we mentioned, like he's good. Last year he would have been 1. There were many years where he would have been the top guy. So like number 2 is still really good, and he's probably still going to go top 5, top 10. We'll see how that all falls out. But like still awesome. And I think I'm going to reiterate what my guy Sims said on his podcast. He mentioned like it's really not even like Marvin Harrison's fault that he got hyped up this high. It's the media.
Yeah.
Like the media is like, right. And hey, like he had a really, obviously he had a great season the year before. And obviously, he's top prospect. things happen. Other prospects come up and such. So anyway. Yeah, Marvin Harrison, he's going to dominate mainly on the outside. Is what also,
Right.
too. I think that's one of the reasons probably why I have him at 2, because he's mainly going to be an outside guy. I don't think he's going to be killing people in the slot. I mean, he could, but I feel like he's better proven with his size and length just to be out there on the outside for the quarterback. But so I'll go from
even on that before you
Yeah.
go to number
Go
one.
ahead.
I the reason that I think that that's kind of key is because, and like I said, with that that contested target rate, like the one thing that I just kind of felt like when I was watching the film was that it didn't feel like he was creating separation at the elite level.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not saying that's like super terrible, but historically, when you compare some of these kind of key indicators like the contested target rate, it's something that I have ignored in the past. But Quentin Johnston, the guy I put number 1 last year, I mean, we'll see. There's still room for him to potentially grow, but he had a near identical career contested target rate in college to Marvin Harrison, and Quentin Johnston was not necessarily known for like creating immense separation. So my point being is that compared to a lot of the other guys that I think we're talking about in this top 5, outside of maybe Adonai Mitchell, but even he had better numbers in this regard. I just don't feel like he was creating the separation that I kind of wanted to see if he was going to be my number 1.
So we both have him at 2. That's interesting. So that means I'm assuming we both have this guy at number 1. And who I have, who I assume John has as well, is Mr. Malik Neighbors out of LSU. I mean, just like you mentioned, it seems like LSU, like they're just finding these amazing receivers and slash quarterbacks, especially receivers. They've been, I mean, they want to dub them. I know there's a lot of good, like Alabama, maybe trying to call themselves wide receiver, but LSU has a really good case. But anyway, in regards to Malik Neighbors, I mean, just technically sound too. Like he is very technically sound, but obviously what pops off with most of him is his athleticism, his explosives. It's not just straight line explosiveness, but it's intermediate, short, and then even with the ball in his hands, he's just very it's like a blend of. It's very much Jamar Chase, I guess. I hate to compare him to another LSU guy, but where he can obviously beat people deep and even set up routes deep. Same with intermediate and short. He's got very good hands. He is one of the better guys at making guys miss. Something that we even mentioned was a little bit not that Marvin Harrison left to be desired. Neighbors was elite at, and I think he can be able to do at the next level. Is even do more with the ball in his hands. Play through contact as well with his explosiveness and strength. And yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, man, like it's not even just like floor versus ceiling, because Neighbors' floor is right up there with Marvin's. It feels like, and it feels like there's still a lot more even meat on the bone for him as well. And he can just scare you in so many ways. And like we mentioned, just be the guy that can flip a game on its head by, literally, a play or two, just getting the ball in his hands. So, and also just the last point I throw it to you too. Another sticking point was he's going to be able to play in the slot outside, and it's going to be a fun chess. He's going to be a fun chess piece for whatever offense gets him. And yeah, I think like you alluded to with Marvin Harrison, I did not expect coming into this, because I'm assuming you did too. I tried to come in not knowing who the top guys are. Like I'd say I get an idea, but not knowing exactly how far people rank them apart and such. But yeah, I did not expect Neighbors to be my number 1, because we heard so much about Marvin Harrison. But here it is at the end of the day. Only I guess concern some might have is, hey, like he's 6 foot, but even then, like at this point, we've seen so many receivers at that. It's not even a terrible measurement.
It doesn't matter.
Like, yeah, it doesn't matter nowadays that receivers can move around and how creative offenses are and how good,
I mean,
the
like,
game
let's
is.
even talk about like who are the top 5 receivers in the NFL right now. Justin Jefferson's like what, 6'1"?
Yeah, Tyreek Hill's
CeeDee
5'10",
Lamb, yeah, CeeDee Lamb's like 6'2". Devontae was like what, 6'2"?
6'1", 6'2", yeah.
Hopkins, I think, was like 6'2", 6'3". So, I mean, Cooper Kupp is 6'1", 6'2".
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's not like you have to be 6'5" to be a top receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, that day and age is kind of past. So
Yeah.
as you mentioned, there's a bunch of other prospects down the list that are have incredible measurables. But anyway, so I'm guessing Neighbors is your 1 as well.
Yeah, so for me with Malik Neighbors, you know, sorry, an ad just popped up my screen. It was so loud. For me, Malik Neighbors was number one. He really popped on film. The thing that really stood out to me, it felt like when he was changing directions, he did not lose speed, which is like a very important thing in the NFL and the reason I'm really harping on the separation thing for anyone listening who's maybe not as familiar with like the draft process in the NFL, if you can't get open in college consistently, then it's going to be even worse in the NFL. Like that's a very key indicator of like who's not good. And now some people can kind of overcome that because it maybe depends on situations. Like for example, I was very critical of Drake London for this in college, and I would argue that he's actually definitely impressed me in the NFL. That said, we've also given him a lot of slack because of the quarterback situation. Same for Kyle Pitts. So we'll see now with Kirk Cousins how things go. But point being, it tends to be a pretty key indicator of like if you're going to be good or not in the NFL is can you get separation at a college level. Malik Neighbors certainly can. He's really good at it. Like I said, the ability to change directions without really losing much of his speed, incredibly impressive, and I think that's going to be really deadly for his route running ability. Really good ball skills, really good despite his size at actually taking contested catches or contested targets and turning them into catches. So a 50-50 ball didn't really feel like a 50-50 ball with him. After the catch, I was really impressed. I don't think that he necessarily has the strength of a Deebo Samuel, but I do think that he's maybe a little underrated in that regard to where his lower half is strong. Like he's not as stocky, right? But he can make it difficult for you to tackle him, and he's not willing to be a little physical after the catch. His vertical was fantastic. I think he had like a 40-inch vertical or something. He didn't do a lot of stuff at the combine, so a lot of this is like pro day and previous stuff. So it's not fully accurate. But I'm pretty sure he had a 40-inch vert. So, yeah, he's a stud. So, I don't know what else to say. Only thing that I think maybe worries me a little bit about him, which these are things that are certainly fixable at the next level, is that it felt like his motor at times maybe a little lacking. I think that's more of a conditioning thing. But in the NFL, obviously, there's going to be more games. It's going to be more physical. Maybe not for receivers, actually, because you can't really touch those guys. But point being, there's going to be more games. So I think he's going to have to get a little bit more conditioned. I think that he could do a little bit better of a job at utilizing his physical talents to beat defenders. It felt like sometimes he kind of gave the corner a little bit of like room that they didn't necessarily deserve to have, if you will. Like he would just kind of slow up near the sideline. He would kind of slow up on deep balls. And I don't know if that was, once again, related to Jaden Daniels, maybe not being able to get the ball there on time or what have you. But it felt like he definitely had moments that could have been touchdowns that maybe got tackled because he slowed up just a little bit. And when it comes to his route running from the slot, I think that he can do all those routes. I just think, he could get a little bit more crisp on them, if you will. So, yeah. But he's my number one.
Yeah, and sorry, last point, I want to throw out another comp, like very Odell-ish, where it's like Odell was like 5'11". I think that was more of the comp, where like, but he could run, could blow by people, like you mentioned. Those contested catches weren't an issue for him, and then, like I said, even he was still even favored in that, and just explosive as heck. And I think especially when you mentioned changing, like it's his seamless change of direction is very key, and it's tough. It can be very tough to defend as like I said, like it's gonna be tough for DBs to not only match up against him, but if he catches it, oh crud, like now we got to get him down. And like you said, he is a bit of a unit to get down on top of that speed as well. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously if where these guys go, if Marvin Harrison is still taken as the first receiver off the board, or if as we get closer to draft time, because it happens sometimes where now that the process goes along more, coaching staffs are more involved. Now that free agency is over, that maybe they go, hey, like Neighbors starts creeping up more as the first receiver off the board, as opposed to Harrison, who's once again not his fault, but he's been put up on that spot for the past basically 11 months. But anyhow, so John's rankings, your rankings were Neighbors 1, Harrison 2, Rome Odunze 3, Brian Thomas 4, and then Adonai Mitchell out of Texas at 5. And then mine were same 1, 2, Malik Neighbors 1, Marvin Harrison 2, We switched though. I put Brian Thomas at 3, Brian Thomas Jr. Rome Odunze was a 4 for me, and then I had Lad McConkey at 5 out of Georgia. So it was be interesting to see how many receivers also are taken in the first round. I mean, just to mention, just because a lot of teams like the past few years been a lot of good receivers, a lot of good receiver classes. I don't think it will end up like the running backs, because that became an issue for the running backs. It was like, oh man, now you can get a guy in the second, third round, because obviously wide receivers have a longer shelf life, unfortunately, as opposed to running backs, because they're not running head first in the linemen and linebackers 20, 30 times a game. And
I mean, receiver, it's also just become one of those positions that like I feel like it's the opposite of the running back, where it's like, I mean, it's similar in the fact that there is like a lot of studs coming out, but it's the opposite in the fact that getting that elite guy is so valuable, because you can, like, unlike the running back where he's done after like 6-7 years, like you can lock that guy up until he's in his like mid-30s and he's probably still, I mean, look at Keenan Allen, right? Like, sure, he just got traded. The guy just had his best season of his career at 31 years old. So, they can still produce. Devontae Adams is still like out there dominating. So, I mean, we're seeing it with, Tyreek Hill's contract. Like, the receiver position is getting paid, and they're only about to continue to get paid with CD and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and all these kind of guys needing extensions.
Yeah, and we'll see. Yeah, we'll see if/when those guys break the bank, of course. But so those are our wide receiver rankings. Very interesting that we had very similar top 4. Obviously, switched around a bit, but honestly,
we would.
But honestly, though, and it's funny. It's just funny because I honestly I expected you to have Marson at 1 until you mentioned it last night. But I'm not surprised you had Rome at 3, just because once again, like that's kind of like our ideologies kind of show. Like, I remember, to go back a couple drafts, remember you're high on Garrett Wilson. I was not. Obviously, you're right there. It's like Rome's kind of like of that field where, like, Rome's more about route running, preciseness, while Brian Thomas is more of my guy where, hey, I've been wrong a couple times on the De'Ami Browns. It's unfortunate for Kadarius Toney. We'll see, but it's not looking great for him. And I don't want to mention Chase Claypool, but man, that was unfortunate.
To be fair, even though you've had some of those takes, I mean, I've equally had some takes. Elijah Moore has sadly not panned out. I was holding out hope even once he got traded to Cleveland.
It looked great in the Jets. So it may be one where, like, sometimes it's just where you end up in your situation a little bit too. Like, sometimes that can hamper.
That did not pan out. I'm trying to think. So apart from Quentin Johnson, we're still TBD. The only reason we're holding out hope at this point, which it could be just straight copium, is the lack of a Mike Williams or a Keenan Allen in the offense now. But I'm going to be real with you. I think one of those 4 guys we named in our top 4 is going to be a Charger this upcoming season.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I don't know. We'll see.
And sorry, just to reference our previous, in 2021, we both had Jamar Chase at 1. We were right there. You had Jalen Waddle above Devonta Smith, which I would say is looking pretty good. And then,
Devonta had a great year, though. Like, last year, I think he had a better year, than Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, but Jalen was hurt a bit last year.
But I think, like, it's debatable. Like, that's like a 2A, 2B right there,
Yeah, and then I'm trying to scroll.
Because they're also both technically number 2s in their offense, so.
Yeah, so it's a little bit harder to exactly. They haven't been given the full opportunity,
right?
That others have. I'm scrolling to see our next draft.
That was the Elijah Moore class. I think I had him number 5. I don't know who I had number 4.
Okay, and then the Garrett Wilson. The next class was the Garrett Wilson. Yeah, Garrett Wilson at 1. Jameson Williams at 2. I had Jameson Williams at 1, and then Alec Pierce at 2. And then after that, like, we both had Olave at 4, and I think we can agree he's probably the 2 of that class.
Yeah, he's 2.
And then I had Christian Watson at 3, so I guess, solid. But yeah, George Pickens at 5. I didn't have Pickens in my top 5 at all. Traylon Burks been a little unfortunate. With Tennessee, hasn't been very good, and then he's been dealing with some injuries. So, like, I would consider him a little bit TBD, but clock's ticking here. This is a big season for him.
If it doesn't happen this season, it's probably not going to happen.
Yes, unfortunately. And then obviously Alec Pierce at 2 really hurts me there. Even then, I remember after doing that one, I was like, man, I probably should have had Christian Watson at 2, but it doesn't matter. And we'll see about Pierce. But anyway, let me see if we did. I think that's about it. And I mentioned last year we were kind of in the same boat with our general top 3. Obviously a little mixed there. So we'll see, obviously how this happens going forward. And yeah, we'll probably be back. Maybe not next week. Probably, we got March Madness, and personally, I am like kind of going through a move process right now. So maybe like 2 weeks till our next pod. But probably, I think cool tackling offensive tackles. That seems to be the next, like those quarterback, wide receiver, and tackle seem to be at a premium, at least according to the draft
picks. A lot of tackles
picks
in this draft.
Yeah, so I think that's where we will review next. Probably share our top. I'll commit to top 3. We'll maybe do top 5. We'll have to take a look and figure that out. Y'all will know next time. But otherwise, anything else you wanted to throw in or mention before we wrap it up there?
Shout out all the honorable mentions, the guys we didn't talk about. For me,
Troy Franklin, who was very. It's just like once again it came down, and then you mentioned Keon Coleman, a guy with great size and such. So. And then I don't know. Some people are high on like Roman Wilson, even though he didn't have as many opportunities, in Michigan because they just ran the heck out of the ball there. So
I'm gonna throw this prediction out there now. I don't think this should happen, but I think that Xavier Worthy is going to be picked in the first round. We did not mention him today. I don't even really I didn't have him in consideration for 6, as like one of my honorable mentions outside of those 5. Like I said, I mentioned Troy Franklin, Lad McConkey is the other 2 guys. So I think the highest I would maybe consider him would have been like 9. But even then, like you said, Keon Coleman or Roman Wilson. There's like Jalen Polk from Washington, who I thought had some interesting stuff. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. Xavier Legette from South Carolina. I kind of liked some stuff I saw out of him. He wasn't really ever given the opportunity to be like the focal point of his offense, but he had some cool stuff. So I don't know. There's some weird stuff around Xavier Worthy, but that 40 time, and the only reason I'm saying this is I don't remember John Ross being talked about as a first-round pick that year, and then he broke the record and went number 10. So we'll see. I kind of have this weird thought that Xavier Worthy might, go in the first round.
A lot of people have him as like their 5th or even their 4th. So I wouldn't be shocked. Personally, and I don't mean to harp on the kid on their way out here, but yeah, one of the reasons I didn't have him up there is because, yes, burner, but issues through contact, like we've seen with some of these other smaller, fast guys. And then once again, I feel like he's more of a straight liner as opposed to, like bursting in and out of his cuts. That showcases his speed. And then, obviously his size, a little bit of concern, 5'11", 165. So press.
Yeah, just
like I said,
just for comparison, I think John Ross was like 20 pounds heavier.
Yeah. So, we'll see. Obviously, where Worthy goes though, because even Hollywood Brown, we saw he was still taken in the first round. He didn't even have that fast of a 40 time,
and then also traded for a first round pick.
Yeah, and then I think we're saying now is obviously he's a free agent that came back to earth, and and that's who he kind of remind me of a little bit. Is Xavier Worthy. It's like a smaller not John Ross, but very good comp there. Smaller Hollywood Brown.
Yeah.
So
I just feel like because of what Tyreek Hill has done in the NFL, I feel like some team is just going to try and convince themselves that speed kills, and they're going to fall in love with him, and they're going to think about, oh, what if we use him in all these creative packages, and we're going to do jet sweeps and all this kind of crazy stuff, and he could just be a weapon, and then they're going to draft him in the first round, and then they're not going to be able to use him like that because it's not as simple as people make it in their daydreams.
Yeah. So,
and that's not to harp on him. I think he'd be a really good like day 2 pick,
yes,
or day 3 pick. Well, maybe like early day 3 if he was going to go day 3, but like second, third round is where I think is his spot. But I feel like some team's going to fall in love with him and push him into the first.
Yeah, and I just want, and also note on Tyreek Hill, because we mentioned Tyreek's also built he came in as a running back, so he was also built a little different in terms of some I mentioned these guys are kind of smaller, wiry. Tyreek, I'm sure anyone can go up and pull a picture. The dude is his legs are just ripped.
He's very stocky for a short player.
Yeah, so it kind of works that way. He's built it's just very compact, but also just not compact. But yeah, he's a lot more muscular than people give him credit for, and like you said, stocky is probably a better phrase. So tough to find those guys. We'll see. Hey, maybe Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas. Once again, Brian Thomas, I feel like would have been more highly regarded maybe if Worthy didn't break the 40 time. But nonetheless, it is what it is, and we'll all see how that all shakes out. As always, feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and share your thoughts and such. I'm sure we'll get some pushback and criticisms. I'm sure there'll be some group thinkers that are like, questioning why we don't have Marvin Harrison on one like everyone else, even though that may change very likely, and it may not even matter because, like I said, like there may be a guy taken in the third, fourth round that ends up having better numbers than these guys at the end of the rookie year, and then situations and whatnot. But we'll be back next time, like I mentioned, to go over offensive line or especially offensive tackle rankings for the draft class. I know NBA season wrapping up, so probably more towards playoff time. We'll go back to talking hoops. Just tough to consistently talk about it really right now, just because we might as well just wait till the season's over instead of just sitting here speculating, because who knows. And but nonetheless, we will see you all next time. Hope you're having a great day. Adios.